Okay, welcome to the Shake, Rattle and Roll podcast, episode 11. Really blessed to have one of the UK pioneers of MMA with us today. Former two-weight world champion with Cage Warriors, former UFC title contender, and just current UFC commentator, BT sports analyst. I can go on and on. Just a general good guy. The one and only Dan Hardy. Thanks, Dan, for spending some time with us this morning. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm really good, mate. Really good. Good to talk to you. Good to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while, pal. How are you coping with the lockdown at the moment? How are you managing? Because you're quite a free spirit by nature. So how are you coping being locked up?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm all right. I am a free spirit, but I'm quite an antisocial one at the same time. And I'm all right now. Live sports started back up, and I've got fights to watch. I'm all good. I've got my gym at home. I've got plenty of Lego here to keep me entertained. I've got enough books that have not had the spine broken yet to keep me educated as well. So I'm all good. I'm enjoying myself.
Touching on what you just said, what's your thoughts on the last three shows UFC put on? Like myself, just so glad to see some MMA back on the TV, if I'm honest. And hats off to Dana for taking the bull by the horns and going against what a lot of people were advising. But I think it's been brilliant and a bit of normality in crazy times. Is there any fight stood out for yourself? Like you said, it's been great that we've got live sports back, and it's been great that, mixed martial arts has kind of been the point of the spear as well in live sports coming back on TV, because we've always got a reputation for breaking new ground and stuff, and it makes sense that we're the first ones to get a live event out there. I think the fights have been fantastic. I think, what we've seen is a lot of fighters, they've been anticipating being out for a long, long time and then getting the opportunity to fight, even if it's, under unusual circumstances in front of no crowd at all and that kind of thing. But I've been enjoying it, and I do like this, although obviously I don't want it to continue. I want the crowd to get back in there so we have an audience. I have been quite liking this shift in an empty arena, and the judges being able to tune into the fights and really kind of pay attention, not being swayed either way. I was still surprised the other week we had a couple of odd decisions that I thought could have gone the opposite way. Yeah, agreed.
I think the fights have been very competitive, and I do think, to be honest, go back to Brasilia, the first fight where we had no crowd. Like, we had, I think, 9 decisions on that night. A lot of really close fought fights, and I don't necessarily think that's because the fighters aren't giving as much. I just think that the fights are far more competitive when it's an even playing field, when one person's not got the crowd rallying behind them, especially in somewhere like Brazil where the crowd are very vocal. Yeah,
it's a good point. I think some, with fighters as well, they feed on that emotion of the crowd sometimes. So they feel an obligation to fight in a certain way or to chase a finish, whereas probably it's a little bit more like a technical sparring session within the gym where your thoughts are much more with you than being swayed by a crowd of anything between 10 and 20,000 people.
Yeah, I think Cowboy benefited from it against Pettis the other week. I thought that was a great fight, but Cowboy was the big question for me, because I always think he struggles with the big crowds, the anxiety of the occasion. So for him to walk into an arena and it to be like a sparring session with someone he knows very well, I actually think it brought a lot out of his performance. And I think there are some fighters that would benefit from that as well. What
did you think of the result of that? The Cowboy Pettis fight?
I thought Cowboy had it, to be honest.
I thought it was a close fight, not a robbery by any stretch, but I thought Cerrone done enough there to take the win, But as we say, what does he always say? Don't leave it in the hands of the judges. So.
That could have been a 5-rounder though, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I want to go back to the beginning with yourself. I've had lots of questions come in, Dan. I'm using these podcasts just for, people to see you on the TV, but just want to have a bit of an understanding how you got into MMA and a little bit, I say this on every podcast. People on the scene at the moment think there was no MMA before Conor McGregor, so it's nice for them just to have a history of how the UK guys, particularly led with, people like yourself and Paul Daly and Jimmy, led the march into the biggest shows for the UK guys. So I want to go back to you, Dan Hardy, as a child. Were you always into martial arts, or what age were you and what was your first start when what got you involved in martial arts?
Well, it was early for me. It was sort of 4, 5, 6 years old, because I was watching the Ninja Turtles. And, I was going to school every day, and all the kids are into Ninja Turtles, and everyone picks a turtle they want to be at play time, and then you run around kicking the hell out of each other. And
I mean, I loved the Ninja Turtles. I was completely wrapped up in it. My parents could see that I loved it as well. And obviously, I was a quiet kid most of the time, but if I loved something, I was obsessive about it. And when I became obsessive about the Turtles, I was kicking everything and everyone in sight. And my dad had made me a set of chucks, so I was flinging them around. And I think they realised that it was probably best to get me some proper training, so I had a place to focus it. I mean, it was the Ninja Turtles that got me into it initially, but then, once I started to get the confidence of, being able to protect myself and look after myself, that replaced the Ninja Turtles fanboy.
So what was your first martial arts class? Where and when, and what was the art?
It was Taekwondo. It was my first one. I was 6 years old, and it was in the community centre across the road from my house. Eagle and Hawk Taekwondo. I had a couple of friends that were there training at the time, and they were very good, and they were the cool kids in school. So I thought I want to get involved in that. But yeah, I mean, my very first experience was a bit of an odd one, because the person that was supposed to be teaching had been replaced by an assistant instructor who just was a bit of a bully. And unfortunately, I've had a lot of experiences in martial arts, as well as a lot of people have, of instructors thinking they're tough guys and being bullies. And that really put me off my first experience, because he threw me out the class. I mean, I was a 6-year-old kid, giggling and laughing and having a good time. And so I was thrown out of my first class, which kind of took me a bit of time to get over. But when I went back, the teacher that I stayed with up until my black belt, a guy called Mick Rowley, I mean, I just wish everybody that got into martial arts had a teacher as good as him, because he was inspiring in a lot of ways. He would lend me books and videos. Hey, check this fight scene out in this movie. Watch these weapons that he uses and how he uses them, and constantly giving me things to absorb and consume it. And I think he realized that I had such an active brain that I needed a lot of things to keep me thinking. And he was the guy. He trained my grandfather as well. He built the training rig in my house. So, I think when you find a really good martial arts instructor, they become family very, very quickly.
And touching on what you said there, I think there's lots of brilliant martial artists, but they never fulfill their potential as coaches, because, as you said, they don't have that ability to socialize as well. You've got I've got a big team, of all walks of life, and it's important that you don't treat them all as robots. You've got to find the individual and find out what makes that person tick. So you how long did you train Taekwondo, and do you still do any training in Taekwondo at all?
Not really, not specifically Taekwondo. I mean, there are certain kicks that I still drill, certain things I still work on that I think have crossed over to mixed martial arts. To be honest, I always felt like my footwork was a big part of my game, and I always credited that with Taekwondo. The speed of moving in and out of range, changing angles, changing direction, switching stance. That was always something that I was quite comfortable and familiar with. So a lot of that stuff crossed over to my kind of the foundation of my martial arts game. But then again, I was very lucky, because the guy that was teaching me, although it was a Taekwondo school, like, we were hitting focus mitts. When we were training at the local school, we'd get all their mats out, so we were grappling and stuff. So, I mean, I always joke, because his name was Mick Rowley, I always say it was mixed martial arts, because I mean, he just kind of taught me what he wanted me to learn. Like, I was learning how to box when I was a kid in a Taekwondo school. So although it didn't really set me up very well for the Olympic Taekwondo that I was coming up against when I was competing, under the full rules, full contact Taekwondo, when I could give somebody a good dig in the ribs to bring their head down so I could minute, then, I felt like he taught me better how to fight than how to be able to fight.
Yeah, so more on a self-defense perspective than the sporting element. That crosses over to all martial arts. You see it a lot in particularly Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You have schools that they create elite level competitors, but also continue to focus on the self-defense side. But at the moment, I do feel the art, particularly in jiu-jitsu and other arts, it's watering down the art as a whole, because they're concentrating on the sporting element more than anything else.
Yeah, and I think there's, I think there are two schools of thought. I have no problem necessarily with that, because, like, when I first started out, for me, it was everything martial arts. I wanted the traditional stuff. I wanted the weapons, the kung fu, the animal styles. But at the same time, I wanted to understand what Bruce Lee was saying. I need to be effective against 1 or 2 or 3 or however many people in the street in a realistic scenario. So I understood there was a shedding process from one to the other. And I think that's kind of what shaped my journey is, when I went out to China to train, that's what made me realize that a lot of the stuff I had that I could do, although I loved it because it was martial arts, I kind of had to leave it behind. I kind of had to focus on the things that were more effective. And it just so happened that this was around the same time that mixed martial arts was becoming a thing, and there was an arena that I could try it. But I'm grateful because I had everything from the traditional to the realistic when I was training.
And I think that's missing on a lot of the guys today, because they benefit from the fact that there's so many specialist MMA gyms out there now, you know. But I do feel that we have lost some of that traditional. I come from a traditional jiu-jitsu background originally, where you would bow before you come on the mat. You know, respect was a key element. A lot of realistic techniques were involved in the art, and I do think we've lost that to some extent. Where, particularly from my own personal point of view, I try and still implement that in some of the BJJ lessons that we teach. Once a month, we try and focus on a self-defense syllabus. So, were there any other sports as a child that you were interested in, Dan, or was it always solely been martial arts?
Yeah, not really. As far as other sports, I mean, my dad was a very good football player, and you know, when I was born, I had football kits ready for me to wear when I grew up and stuff. I was destined to be a football player, and then when my dad realised I was left-footed as well, I think all of his dreams came true, because he always said to me, a left-footed player always gets a game. I didn't always get a game. My problem was that I was kicking the ball when everyone was going to head it, so I was getting thrown off the pitch for studying people in the face accidentally. I mean, I tried other sports. I played rugby for school. Believe it or not, at the time I was a prop, which I'm not built like a prop. I was at the time, but again, I mean, I got thrown off the field. I got thrown out of the team for fighting. Because, I mean, to me, it was like, well, he's got the ball, and I need to take the ball off him and get it over there. Well, if I hit him, I can take it off him. like that kind of became my problem solving for a lot of things, which it took a bit of developing to grow out of that. But other sports, the other thing as well is team sports were never really my thing. Yeah. Like the idea that someone else on the team was going to put in as much effort as me, I never gave anybody that kind of how hard I worked. So it never really suited me too much.
So, obviously, in the traditional martial arts, you touched on it. How long did you go to China for? And how old was you when you went over there? Because I read that you went over and trained with the Shaolin monks. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was only there for a couple of months. My plan was to go over there and check it out and then go back and spend 3 years there. That was my initial plan. But it was in those 2 months that I realised, you know, what I really wanted to do with my time and my martial arts training. And as much as I loved it, there were a lot of realisations that kind of steered me away from the traditional martial arts from that time. So that was 2000, 2001. I was there for a couple of months. So I was about 19 at the time.
Yeah.
And you know, I'd already got my black belt at 17, and I'd started training in a few other different styles when I was about 14. So I was doing Wing Chun. I'd started Thai boxing. I was doing traditional jiu-jitsu under Paul Lloyd Davis at the Nottingham University when he was training Michael Bisping and stuff. Yeah. So I was picking things up and like supplementing my overall game. But for me, I always wanted to go to the source. You know, like Crouching Tiger came out when I was at college. I watched that 3 times the week it came out. I just love the idea that there was something mystical about martial arts that I could only find if I went to China, went to the source. Yeah. And I'll be honest, like China back in the day, 20 years ago, was a very, very different experience to what it is now. Like the times I've been recently for UFC events, it's much more of it's a big technological country now. There's a lot of weird stuff going on, in my opinion. It doesn't feel the same as it did 20 years ago when I was out in the countryside. I didn't have a mobile phone because they just didn't exist. And, you know, I was completely consumed by it at the time. It was a beautiful experience. But because it was so long ago and it was so unique, it feels a lot like it was a movie I watched. I'll be honest. It feels something separate from myself now.
Well, so what steered you towards the mixed martial arts side of things? How old were you, and what was your first introduction into MMA training?
Well, the first time I'd heard of MMA as a competitive sport was UFC 2. I bought UFC 2 on video from an old Virgin Megastore in Nottingham. And I was at college at the time, and I'd ran down to Virgin Megastore and bought this tape and took it back to college and sat and watched it. Ran back down, traded that tape in, got UFC 3, took that back to college and watched that as well. And first thing I thought is, this scares the hell out of me. I have to try this. But it just wasn't accessible at the time. So I I was trying to make it up best I could by going to jiu-jitsu or judo or Thai boxing, and then, watching as much as I could and trying to piece things together. And then around that same time was when I went to China. So I spent a couple of months in China. And when I came back, I was like, right, okay, I'm gonna start shedding things out of my training that I don't necessarily need, and start focusing more entirely on this kind of competition. And that's when, I started bumping into a few different people around Nottingham that were training. Paul Daly, Matt Howells were a couple of guys that were working, and just started jumping in with training sessions. And Paul Daly and I used to train for hours and hours. We'd do 40-odd rounds of sparring because we had good control, and we trusted each other. So a lot of my early mixed martial arts training was just basically Paul and I just kind of figuring it out between us. And then Paul would go over to Leicester Shoot Fighters to work with Nathan Leverton, and I'd go to somewhere else to work with someone else, and we keep coming back together and piecing things together. And as Paul was fighting a year before me, so as Paul started to have success, I turned pro. I started to have some success, and then as we were going around the country doing different events, like we just started recruiting people that were coming along board, and everyone that joined the team, they brought something with them. Like judo, Jimmy Wallhead came in, and he was as strong as an ox. He had great ground skills, great clinch work, and we could give him some striking. So as soon as then we started seeing those developments, we started picking.
A perfect mix where you bounced off each other as well. Then, yeah.
We had no teachers, we had no coaches. Yeah. We had a Thai boxing coach or a grappling coach, and the onus of building the game was on us, really, and it was much more about us coming together and sharing our skills and seeing what we could make out of it.
Where did the name Roughhouse come from? Who came up with Roughhouse?
That was so back in the early days in Nottingham, there was a gym called Formula One, and there was like a studio space on the first floor, and we were training there, Matt Howell and Paul, and they were basically sparring and stuff, and someone put their head around the corner of the studio and was like, what's going on here? What's all this roughhousing? It just kind of stuck. Yeah. And then Matt showed up with some T-shirts that said "Anytime Mother Effer" on the back, and you see those walking around a Cage Warriors event, and everyone's like, especially because the thing is, Matt Howell looked like Tito Ortiz.
Yeah.
The reason I spotted him originally was at an amateur MMA fight. I saw him across the room looking like Tito Ortiz and wanted to fight him because I didn't like Tito. That's how it started off, but like Matt was the Roughhouse front. Like he was the guy that wore the T-shirts and told everybody what we were doing and stuff. And they were good days, man. They were good days.
Is Matt involved in martial arts? So I remember Matt because I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure him and Marshman in the early stages of Marshman's MMA career were booked to fight on an event.
Were they?
I tell you what event it was. Remember he and Freeman put an event together, and some guys tucked him up financially. I can't remember what it was called.
Was it Pride and Glory?
No, It was called. Oh crikey, Kruger. It was a big event. Ian was promoting it. He had guys come in and fund him, and then when he's gone to meet the guys for the funding, they'd set him up. The office was closed and everything else. And I'm sure it was Matt. Ian Butlin was. One of the Butlin brothers was going to fight on the card. It was a really good card in principle, but it never came to fruition because the guys that had promised all the money and the funding had pulled out on it. But I'm sure Matt was matched up against. It was definitely Marshman or Gareth Williams, one of my guys on that card. Is he still involved at all, Matt? Because he was quite a formidable character back in the day, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, no, not really. I haven't seen Matt for a long time. I know he's well, and I know he still follows what we're doing, but I'm not sure he trains anymore. Yeah, Matt was very tough. His nickname was the Howitzer. He had some heavy hands on him.
Yeah, I remember.
Well, him and Paul, they met playing ice hockey. A lot of people don't know this, but they were originally ice hockey players. That's how they met. And I always remember.
Were they enforcers for each side, or?
You would think, wouldn't you? Can you imagine those two as enforcers? Like Matt always had a really powerful lower body. Like he always had an arse like Tyron Woodley. You know what I mean? Like big.
Yeah.
Like, so if he decided he was moving forward, you couldn't stop him. Matt was awesome, but he had a few fights, and I think he got focused on university and left us to it.
Where was your first fight, and how did that come about? I'm guessing there was no amateur fights back in the day. You straight into professional.
Yeah, the only thing I did as far as amateur was something that Paul Lloyd Davis used to run, which was called the KSBO tournaments, and that stood for Knockdown Sport Budo. And it was 1 5-minute round on
mats on judo mats in a sports hall, no headshots.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was useful for me because it allowed me to realize very quickly that I had a very incomplete skill set. And if I couldn't punch somebody in the face, I was up against it. Now, Paul Daly, on the other hand, he was stopping guys with low kicks in these competitions. So, that allowed me to believe, okay, as a striker, I can still supplement my game. And Paul was always a very naturally good wrestler anyway. Just physiologically, he was just a very adept at scrambling. So I had to learn a lot of those skills, and I entered a couple of the KSBO tournaments and enjoyed them. But I never really felt like I was getting a fair shout because I couldn't knock people out, and that was
limited by what you could use.
Yeah.
So where was your first pro fight?
My first pro fight was in Bracknell on Extreme Brawl 7.
So how did that come about? Were you contacting guys and saying, look, we're available to fight? How did that come around?
Well, Paul was fighting about a year before me. So Paul had a few fights, and my first fight was Lee Dosky, and Paul had already
a great character, Lee. Yeah.
Lee was awesome. So I remember cornering Paul against Lee Dosky on an event down near London, and Paul stopped him in the first round. And then a couple of weeks later, we were at a tournament in like Coventry or Sheffield or something like that, and I got chatting to the promoter of Extreme Brawl. I can't remember his name now. It'll come to me in a minute. Andy something, I think it was. Anyway, so I said, because I was there cornering Paul, and Paul had a kickboxing match that night and had won. And I said, I'm keen to fight soon. And he offered me a fight. He said, Lee Dosky. I thought, perfect. I'll take that fight. And that was kind of how it came about. It was, I was Paul Daly's sparring partner, and I decided I was going to start having some fights. And I think because Paul was so good and so respected, they started giving me fights because they assumed I was going to be on a level. Unfortunately, that first fight didn't work out very well, though, because I was far too excited. And the thing is, like, Paul and I are very different. And this occurred to me on that night because, like, Paul's way of getting up for a fight is it's aggro, it's like slapping himself, he's getting wound up, he's getting fired up. So, yourself, if you're trying to motivate someone, you motivate them how you expect they want to be motivated. And Paul did that to me. So I'm standing backstage, I was coming out to Pantera at the time, which is also far too heavy. So I've got Pantera playing. I've got Paul Daly's there. He's slapping me. I'm getting all fired up. They announced my name, and I literally sprinted to the cage. Got in there. My heart's racing. Fight starts, and I threw everything at Lee Dosky. For the first five minutes, I threw everything at him. Felt fine. Went back to my corner. Everything's going all right. Came out the second round, did the same thing. Gassed myself out. Yeah. Towards the end of the second round, I shot a double leg and took him down, and I got the most basic hip bump over into mount, and I was stuck in mount position. And as I was scrambling, I gave my back and got caught in a rear naked choke at 4 minutes 59 seconds of the second. That's haunted me ever since.
Do you ever see Lee now? I see Lee regularly because he's quite prominent on the BJJ circuit. He runs a really successful club now, Carson Gracie, Norfolk. He's a black belt. I've competed with Lee in the Masters a couple of times as well. But he's never changed. He's right from the MMA. His personality is still the same, constantly. But sometimes people look at his messing around and his laughing, joking style and think, but he's a serious competitor, And he was a very, very good MMA competitor. Very, very good BJJ competitor. Now he's a very, very good coach. He's got some good young amateurs coming through on the MMA scene, and he's doing really well. So he's a good guy, Lee. Next time I see him, he watches the podcast, so he'll probably be sat there chuckling when he watches it.
Oh, brilliant. I've seen him a couple of times because we fought again. We fought twice. That was because I lost my first fight to him. I was desperate to get a rematch. So I fought him, I think 4 fights into my career, we got a rematch. So we've got one each at the moment. So that rubber match is still out there if you fancy. It was funny. The last time I was chatting to him was at an event like FX3 or something like that. And because the second time we fought, I broke his arm. I kicked his forearm and broke it. And he told me this whole thing about how he had to take 6 months off playing the guitar. And
he loves the guitar, Lee.
Good dude.
Were you working at the time, Dan, or was this something you were doing full time?
I was working all the way up until I signed my UFC contract. Yeah. There was just no money in it. I think I got 150.
No, there wasn't. So it was. I think in the early days that was a case for just about everybody. You had to do some sort of work to subsidise paying bills if you wanted. when did you think to yourself, this is something I want to pursue? MMA is something that I want to do as a full-time living. Was this something you dreamed of from the start? There was a dream you were always chasing, or did it just fall upon you when the UFC came calling?
I honestly don't ever think that I really looked at it like it's something that could become a job. I just never did. I mean, when I was first watching those events, like, these guys were fighting for a bit of cash. It was all about the prestige and the title, really. That was what it was about. And I never, the idea of making money from martial arts was only through coaching. That was really the only option I saw at the time. So I was going to do this for myself and then get into coaching, to continue further in the martial arts. But still, it wasn't something I thought would become a job. I just wanted to do it just to because it scared the hell out of me, and it just seemed like a good place to test myself. So, I mean, I was working because when I made my debut, I was at university, so I was studying full time. I was doing an art course. Say studying. You don't really study when you're doing art, do you? But I was working two jobs. I was a fitness advisor at a leisure centre, and I was also working in the stockroom of a shoe shop, just to kind of get as much money as I could together, just to keep what I was doing. And eventually, I started to let things go, like the shoe shop. I let that job go, and I just focused on the job at the leisure centre. And then they started to see that I was competing regularly, so they started giving me time off to compete and to travel and stuff. So, I mean, I was very fortunate with the jobs that I had. But even still, I got to the UFC and I thought to myself, you know what, like, now's the time to really focus all my time and energy on this. But it still felt like a gamble. It still felt like a huge risk. I mean, because what my first UFC contract was 3 and 3.
Yeah.
I was getting $6,000. Then you get your tax taken out. You pay your coaches, your transport, and I had nothing left. So it was always a risk, and still living at home, can't rely on my parents to look after me. It was an interesting, challenging time. But I think that because there wasn't an option to make money, there was a purity to it, which I don't think is around anymore necessarily.
There's far too many people, and I say this to, when I'm dealing with any of the fighters that I work with. Our Jack done an interview the other week, and he summed it up perfectly. I felt that when he says, the advice he gives the youngsters is chase the dream, and everything else will come with it. Chase what you want to be. Focus on the becoming the best version of you. But then the money will come, the fame will come, and the titles will come as long as you're focusing on the dream. And all too often, I have guys saying, "Oh, I should be getting more money," or "I should sign for this organization. They're paying a little bit more." And I always say, "What's the goal? What's the goal at the end of it?" Short-term sacrifice for long-term goal is what I try and preach down there. Let's go back to just before you signed for UFC. So you were fighting on a range of shows. I've looked at your Sherdog profile, and you were fighting on a variety of shows, but quite a few fights on the Cage Warriors organization, where you became a 2-weight world champion. How did that feel for you, that first world title? How, for Dan Hardy, who'd been a martial artist all his life, to be crowned a world champion of an organization, how did that feel for you?
That first time was very, very special, because I'd always wanted a belt. I'd always wanted a title belt, just because I think they look cool. I always had, the images of Bernard Hopkins, in his own gym with all the belts along the ropes and stuff. And I just thought it'd be so cool to have a world title belt. And I thought I'd wear it everywhere. I thought I'd do a T2 Ortiz and just wear it everywhere I went, which I didn't, fortunately. But I think the thing that made it even more sweeter is that first world title was against Matt Thorpe, and it was a hell of a 25-minute battle.
Yeah.
Like, if it was a first round knockout, or it was somebody I didn't respect as much, it wouldn't have felt nearly as special as it did. But that fight was, I remember looking back at it now, and people still talk about it. People talk about the GSP armbar escape. That was old news by the time I'd fought Matt Thorpe.
Yeah.
Like, Mark Goddard already knew that I'd get my arm half twisted off. So it was like, that was a big night, because it was quite an intimate thing, because it was Cage Warriors Coventry. It was quite a small scene. No one outside of the UK was really that bothered about what we were doing, but in the scene, it was a big deal. It was
huge back in the day, to get on a Cage Warriors event, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. And to be fighting for a world title in Coventry against someone like Matt Thorpe, who we could have switched careers and gone opposite ways. Matt Thorpe could have been as successful, because 6'4", long rangy striker with great submissions, trained by the Butlins. He was a good fight, and I think that's what made it so special, was the fact that it was a hard fought battle. And my parents never used to come to my fights back then. It always used to be anxious that when they were there. So as soon as the fight was over and they found that I'd won, they drove over from Nottingham to Coventry to come and see me, and shared that moment with them. That was pretty special. And then for me, the next thing I had to do, because the fight before Matt Thorpe was a no contest. I got elbowed in the back of the neck, and I have no memory of the fight at all. I lost feeling in the side of my face for a few months and all kinds of stuff. So my first thing I wanted to do was to get a rematch. So it was winning the belt against Matt Thorpe was huge, but defending it the first time against a guy that I needed to get some payback against was that was on par. That was almost special for me.
So you now work with Cage Warriors in an analyst stroke guest commentator role. What differences have you seen? Because for me, Cage Warriors have took the bull by the horns, to be honest. They've created the niche in the market as being that premier organisation outside of the UFC that will get you to the UFC. You've worked closely with them. What sort of changes have you seen that have been so prominent then over the last few years?
I think, to be honest, I mean, the one thing that Cage Warriors has always had, which in my opinion has made Cage Warriors, back in the day all the way through to now, is Ian Dean.
I knew you were going to say that. Yeah, I agree.
I mean, without Ian Dean, there is no Cage Warriors. Like, Ian Dean is Cage Warriors. For the amount of promoters that have handled it in the past, it's passed from one person to the next to the next. The one person that's kept it consistent and kept it high level is Ian Dean. And of all the people in the sport I know, it's very rare that you find someone that can look at two fighters and go, that's a fight.
Yeah,
that's a fight. And a lot of the time, I don't even realize until the first round started. And then I look over at Ian Dean and I'm like, you're a genius. Like,
yeah.
See how these fights are going to play out. So as much as the actual production's changed around it, like the core of Cage Warriors is still very much the same, and it's always been of high quality. I just think that, as the event's grown, the people around Ian Dean have built an event that supports his matchmaking.
I agree. What I find with Ian as well, he's very, very good at finding the right opponents at the right time for certain individuals. It's always a step up. Like, for example, we use our Jack as an example. He stepped up the opponents perfectly. Different styles, different nationalities, different abilities, different records, but he's brilliant at what he does. He's an absolute encyclopedia. I remember him once having a conversation with Chris Edwards, and Chris Edwards mentioned a fight he'd had, and Ian corrected him and said, no, you didn't fight so-and-so on that date. You've just off the cuff, he didn't even have to look at his phone or anything. He just knew, so he's an absolute encyclopedia. And, he's somebody I feel in the sport doesn't get the credit at times that he really, really does deserve. I say this to everybody. You could pick Ian up, put him in the UFC, and he would do that job standing on his head. Do a Sean Shelby or McMahon that job, no problem whatsoever.
I've said it to the UFC. I've said, look, and I don't want to rob them off Cage Warriors, but like, if you need a European matchmaker, there is no one better.
No one better.
Ian's
somebody I want to get on the podcast, but he's a shy guy by nature, so I'm gonna have to get my persuasion skills in, because it'd be nice for people to listen to some of the stories he has, because he's been there from day one with Cage Warriors. So. It'd be nobody more perfect to talk about the history of the Cage Warriors brand than Ian. So I get to work on that later on today.
I've got so many good memories of Ian Dean. And the thing, I mean, I've fought on Cage Warriors, I think 14 times, and he matched me every single time. And I have memories of, like, I didn't win every one of my fights on Cage Warriors. The times that I lost, I remember Ian taking it very personally, like it was his fault. Like that wasn't the right fight at the right time, or he'd given me a short notice opponent because I was desperate to fight, and it was, But I remember fighting out in Japan, and I got disqualified in the main event. Called him up from the arena. There's a Cage Warriors event next weekend. I need to be on that. Like, I need closure. I need to fight. And he did. He matched me up. And I always said the same thing. I don't want anybody shit. I don't want anybody with a losing record. I want someone that's going to be respectable. And he, even into the UFC. Into my UFC career, UFC 95, I called him up from the hotel because my Xbox wouldn't plug into the TV at the hotel, and he literally said, "Come over and pick mine up." And I drove to his house and took the
I give an example of how, as you said, as well, he can pull out a shortness fight. Cage Warriors 97. Jack's gone to the weigh-in. He's going to fight the German lad for the world title. and the brain scan result has been translated on the morning of the weigh-in, and the fight's been pulled. And at 24 hours notice, he still managed to find somebody that was a Brazilian international that was safe MMA covered, had all the medicals in place, and would come and put up a fight. I mean, how many people at 24 hours notice can find a fight out to slot straight into a main event of a televised event? You know, so yeah, he's a good guy. He's a genuine guy. He wants the best for us all the time. You know, he never makes a decision for his own benefit. You know, and sometimes me and him will have an honest conversation. We'll go, Rich, that's the wrong direction for you to go in. And I respect his opinion. So, you know, I do take on board sometimes when he gives me advice.
Yeah. He's a good dude.
Right. So you've dominated the European scene. You've built up a really good record, a good win streak. How did the UFC call come around then? How did that happen? Did you have a manager at the time? Did they just contact you direct through Paul? What was the scenario around that?
Well, I was signed to Warrior Promotions, so I was being managed by the same guys that were running Cage Warriors, and as you remember that, I mean, Warrior Promotions kept going from one person to the next, and someone would disappear, and the next one would come along. Oftentimes, I didn't know who was answering the emails, to be honest. So the offer came through because I was fighting out in Japan. I'd entered the Cage Force tournament, and there was nothing official, but there was kind of a loose rumor that the winner of the tournament would get a call to the UFC. I mean, what was special about this is it was a cage event in Japan, and they didn't use cages over there. So it was an 8-sided cage that they used elbows. It was particularly geared towards getting someone into the UFC. So that's what it was. It was that tournament. I mean, they'd shown a bit of interest previously, but it just, I think I was 10-3 at the time. I just wasn't ready, and I'd also seen guys step into the UFC and have a few fights and then leave. And I was walking up the mountain, never to go back down. You know, yeah. I wanted to finish my career with the UFC, so I didn't want to step in and step out again. I wanted to make sure I was ready when I arrived. So when that tournament came about, I knew that if I won the tournament, I was deserving of a UFC contract because of the guys in the tournament. You know, there was some good, tough Japanese fighters. Akira Kikuchi was in the tournament. My first opponent, Daiso Ishige, was the king of Pancrase at the time. 20-1 his record was. So I knew that I was up against some really tough opposition. Won the first round, went back and prepared again. Went back, won the second round, came home, prepared again, went back and for the third round and got disqualified. And that was when I called Ian Dean. I was fighting Yoshiyuki Yoshida in the main event. Accidentally kicked him in the groin at the start of the second round, and they carried him out on a stretcher and put the belt over his shoulder, and he got his UFC contract. Not even sure he got off his stretcher to sign the damn thing, to be honest. But I was disqualified. Called Ian Dean immediately and said I need to fight next weekend. And it was, to me, that was my opportunity had been missed. And what was even more disappointing is that, like, the first time the UFC had contacted, I knew I wasn't ready, so I turned it down. My next opportunity was Pride, and I always wanted to fight in Pride. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted I wanted Cage Warriors to do the 73 kilo belt. So you said Cage Warriors 2-weight champion. Technically yes, but technically no at the same time. You know what I mean? And like Connor's the Cage Warriors 2-weight champion because he did featherweight and lightweight.
Yeah.
I did welterweight, but the other weight class was 73 kilos. And the reason for that was because at the time, Alexander Isidro was the lightweight champion. And we'd already fought to a decision, and I won the decision on a different event. And he wanted a rematch. I wanted to fight in Pride. So I wanted to be fighting at 73 kilos. I wanted Gomi. That was my dream. I wanted to fight Gomi in Pride. I won that fight, and then I got entered into a tournament in Holland at 73 kilos. And the winner of that tournament went to Pride. And I lost a really, really bad decision to David Barron, who then went on to fight Gomi. So like I was out in Japan, already feeling like my opportunity to get into Pride had gone. Yeah. And this opportunity to get into the UFC had now gone as well. So like I remember coming back to Nottingham to fight on that Cage Warriors show, just feeling angry and feeling like my opportunity had passed by. But then, you know, you just kind of keep grinding, don't you? And I think maybe a fight or two later, I was matched up with Chad Reiner on Cage Warriors USA. Went out there for that event, prepared, main event.
Andre winner was co-main event, and right before Andre walked out for his fight, so it was Jimmy, Andre, and then me was the last 3 fights on the card. Jimmy's fight had just finished, and the commission came backstage and they said, "That's it, show's over." Like, no, there are 2 more fights left. The show can't be over. Like, no, that's it, show's over. Insurance ran out at midnight. So that's what happened. Like, literally.
So the 2 of you could. Well.
So, like, I'm literally gum shield, wraps, healthy, ready to fight. Andre's the same, and the event was cancelled at midnight because the insurance ran out.
Oh man.
Again, it was like one setback after another. Like, my opportunity, because he was a UFC vet. Like, he'd fought. Yeah. So, like, again, you're kind of thinking, right, well, if I beat that guy, then they'll see, and you're kind of trying to find that. It's snakes and ladders all the time, isn't it? Old school MMA. Like, you're trying to get a little bit of progress, and then you slide way back down again. A little bit of progress, and Chad Reiner was like, I thought, if I beat this guy, there's a good chance I'll get my contract. Yeah. And again, that opportunity was taken away. But we got there eventually. I mean, Cage Warriors, out their own pocket, brought him over to England to fight me here, and knocked him out in the 3rd round, and that's when the contract came.
And the contract on the back of that. Your first Akihiro Gono, I believe, wasn't it? Was your first fight, if I remember right? Yeah. So that was on the Bisping card, was it? In
Lieben, UFC 18.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So how did that feel? I mean, being a lifetime martial artist, you're there. They're announcing you. The music comes on. How was that for you, Dan Hardy, the fighter? Was that a realization? Was it like, were you embracing the pressure? Were you nervous? How was you feeling at that moment?
It was. I was nervous because I wasn't nervous. Because all the time I'd built myself up to be, I want to fight in the UFC. I want to fight in the UFC. And when I was standing behind that curtain and my music was playing, I'd made it. Like, the goal that I'd set out to achieve, I'd achieved. And I'd not honestly looked past that goal. I'd not gone, I want my first win in the UFC. I want a title shot in the UFC. It was just to get there, to make it, to step foot in the octagon. And I'd done that. So that first fight was very surreal. Like, the walk out to the octagon. I mean, it was surreal because I'd made it.
Yeah. Do you feel there was less pressure on you than trying to get there for some of the fight? Yeah, I agree, and I say this to everybody. We felt with Jack's debut, the pressure was off a little bit. First fight on the card compared to being the last fight at midnight. None of the extreme media duties that come with being a main event on a Cage Warriors event. So when people say, "Oh, how did it feel?" For me, as his dad and his coach, it was a weight off my mind, because one loss, as you said, leading up to these contracts with the UFC, sets you back four or five fights. So you've gone out, you've had the win in front of an English crowd. That must have been surreal.
Yeah, it was, especially given the fact that it was Gono. I mean, I'd watched Akihiro Gono coming through Pride, And I'm walking out to the octagon thinking, okay, my UFC debut, I've got a guy that's beat Hector Lombard and Gegard Mousasi. Like the UFC are not giving me any even.
From the Lions from day one,
Straight away. First fight on the main card as well. It was an amazing evening, because it was, my team were there, like the fans rallied around. The first time I'd walked out to the octagon and everyone had bandanas on. I mean, as stupid as that sounds, like when I was walking out at Cage Warriors, I was the only one in the arena wearing a bandana around my face,
I want to touch on that. Where did the Outlaw come from? Because that was one of the questions that somebody sent in. Where did the nickname the Outlaw come from?
Well, the obvious answer, and the one that I give most of the time, is Nottingham, Robin Hood. I've always been a punk rocker. I've always kind of stood out and been a bit different. So like the Outlaw always kind of suited me. But the truth is, that was the handle that I used on the Cage Warriors forum. You'll remember back in the day.
I used to love the forum. I miss that forum, because there was some brilliant trolls on there.
It was the whole Marcus Davis trash talking thing was because
yeah.
It was a great place. It was every morning I get up and I check Cage Warriors forum and Hotmail. That was the start of my day.
I remember being on holiday and my kids were kids then, and I'd go into like a little cafe and just check on the internet cafe and sound what's going on there, because I was away for a week abroad. Brilliant times. Yeah. And I think Facebook and Twitter probably put paid to the forum, didn't they? Because social media advanced, and there was so other many ways to. But I do miss the Cage Warriors forum. Who was the one? Creonte. Can you remember Creonte?
Yeah.
Used to type like a Brazilian would speak, and he would troll everybody on there. Some real good characters on there.
Yeah.
So you've had your win, then you go on a 4-fight win streak. You know, arguably at the time the most successful British guy in the UFC. Then all of a sudden you have the phone call to say you're going to fight GSP for the title. How was that for Dan Hardy?
Well, that was a bit strange because it was initially I fought Gono in my debut, then I fought Roy Markham in co-main event in London and knocked him out. Then the whole Marcus Davis thing, which was, you know, I mean, that got a lot of attention because thanks to the Cage Warriors Forum for that. And then the next fight was supposed to be Don Young Kim. I was supposed to fight Don Young Kim at UFC 105, and I felt this was going to be a big test because Kim was the backpack guy. He was a big, strong judo guy. He was going to hang on to me, and so I was thinking this was going to be the most boring fight of my UFC career so far, and probably the most difficult. And then I think 6 weeks before the fight, I just finished morning training. I was sat at home doing a bit of research on Don Young Kim, and Joe Silva called me up, and he said, "I'm sorry, Don Young Kim's injured. He's got a knee injury. He's out of the fight." So straight away, I'm thinking they're going to find me a replacement. It'll be, you know, just someone middle of the road, whatever, kind of. Just as long as I'm on the card, I'm not really bothered. And he said, "How about Mike Swick?" And my reaction all the time was yes. Not bothered where it is, when it is, how much you're going to pay me. Is there a fight? Yes, I'll take the fight.
Yeah.
He said, "How about Mike Swick?" And I said yes before I realised he was #1 contender.
Yeah, and he was a big name back then. You know, he come off the Ultimate Fighter. Everybody knew who he was.
Yeah, and the thing is as well with Mike Swick, and I always say this now. I did his podcast the other day, and I said it to him. Mike Swick at middleweight was dangerous. Like, his nickname was Quick, if you remember. Mike Quick Swick.
Swick Quick, wasn't it? Yeah.
Like, he would either run over you with a flurry of punches, like Vitor Belfort, Wanderlei Silva style, or you would level change and he'd guillotine you with his Swickatine.
Yeah.
Like, he was a legit guy, but then when he came down to welterweight, it's like, now he's a huge, strong, powerful, fast guy. Like, I knew it was a big test, but then at the same time, Joe Silva was like, well, he's #1 contender, so if you beat him, you get a title shot. So I knew that 6 weeks before the Mike Swick fight. Yeah. So in my head, as I'm going through this process of preparing, I'm preparing to earn a title shot. I wasn't preparing to win the fight. I was preparing to earn a title shot.
It's a hell of an incentive, isn't it?
Yeah. I also knew GSP was going to be there. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it wasn't only I wanted to beat Mike Swick to get the shot. I wanted to beat Mike Swick in a way that would stick in GSP's mind.
Yeah.
So, like, the truth is, for that fight, I watched loads and loads of Wanderlei Silva. Because my realization is that if I'm fighting Mike Swick and he starts to move forward, me as a counter striker, my natural thought is to move out the way and move back. But that's when he gains momentum and he's more dangerous. So I thought, I'm just going to Wanderlei Silva this. Every time he runs onto me, I'm just going to start hitting him. And it worked. Like, I hit him 3 times and hurt him clean every time. Couldn't finish the dude, though. He's very, very tough.
Yeah. He's gone on to run the AKA academies in Thailand. The Thai coach at our gym at Show MMA was one of the head coaches there for many years. So we've got a fantastic coach now, Kru Heem. He's from Thailand and he married a Welsh girl. So this is by chance that he's walked into my gym. She went to Thailand to teach for 2 years, started training at the gym, ended up marrying Heem, moved back for financial reasons. I'm in the middle of a striking class 2.5 years ago, and in walks this little fella from Thailand, you know, with some guy from a place called Crick Owl. And the guy from Crick Owl says, "Oh, my friend's just moved over here from Thailand. He's a Thai boxing coach and he's looking for somebody to call." And you know what it's like, Dan. You hear so many stories. People come in my gym constantly. I can help you with this. And so I've said, "What's your name?" So he said, "I'll write it down for you." And he says, "I was one of the head coaches at AKA." And I'm thinking, yeah, of course you was, pal. You know, you've just strolled in here off the street and, you know, you're asking for a bit of coaching. So I says to him, "Right, I tell you what, come next Tuesday, take a session. If it goes well, we'll discuss about you coming on board to work as part of the team. If it doesn't, nothing ventured." And I thought, excuse my friend, I thought he was a bullshitter. So he's written his name down. He's gone off. We come back home, you know, Jack. I type his name into the internet, and it's like page after page after page, working with Mark Hunt, working with Mix. I was like, I didn't take a mobile phone number off him. So I'm sat there now for like 4 or 5 days thinking I'm going to have to drive to this little village and start saying, do any of you know a Thai guy that's just moved into the area? But luckily he rang me, came, and he has been an absolute brilliant addition to the team. Our striking has gone through the roof at all levels. I got some amateurs now who's Thai boxing is on a par with some of the high level pros. But yeah, he talks quite fondly of Mike Swick. So it's just a different story. So you've beaten Mr. Swick. How long did you have then before the GSP fight? What was the gap between those fights?
So the Mike Swick fight, I believe, was in September of 2009, and the GSP fight was in March of 2010. So I had about 4 months. And I remember having a couple of weeks where I was very, very much struggling to sit still. And then I started training camp, and I did about a 16-week training camp, which was stupid.
Yeah, too long.
Yeah, burnt myself out.
Were you the first guy from the UK to fight for a UFC title? I believe you were, yeah?
Yeah.
So a lot of pressure on you as well. So how do you prepare for GSP? Did you have to change anything within the training? Were you and the team sitting down and thinking, we're going to have to work to this game plan? Or was it, I'm just going to do what I do and we see where the cards lie?
I mean, the reality is I think we all knew what I was up against. Unfortunately, the striking coach that I've been working with all the way through my career, we'd kind of parted ways at the beginning of the Mike Swick training camp. So I got a new striking coach. I'd gone from a 6'2" Jamaican dude that was a very slick counter striker that suited my style to a guy who was 5'5" that liked to put his forehead on your chest and beat your ribs up. So I was trying to integrate this new style of striking into my game, which was very, very different to what I was used to.
Yeah.
I was, so that like, it was a bit of a strange time. I also had another coach, I won't mention his name, but he told me that he didn't want to be in the losing corner, so he wasn't going to work with me.
Right.
So that, I never forgot that sentence.
Yeah, imagine, yeah.
That stuck in my mind. So I ended up, I had Steve Papp, who was my striking coach. And then obviously the guys around me, Jimmy and Andre and Dean Amersinger was a big part of that training camp, obviously, with him being, a good wrestler and so strong. But I had no resources, was the truth of it. I'd come from the contract that was the Swick fight. So I was I think my contract for GSP was like 22 and 22 or 24 and 24. Obviously, you don't get that money up front, and all the money from the Swick fight had already been spent on that training camp. So yeah. I really didn't have a great deal of resources to work with. Yeah. So I kind of did what I could here. And then I planned on going out to the US for the last 4 weeks because I was fighting in New Jersey. I wanted to be as close to the venue as I could, but I could literally only afford to bring myself and my striking coach out and rent a Holiday Inn room that we shared. And then I flew in a brown belt from 10th Planet in Hollywood, who was he was a good training partner of mine, a guy called Alder Hampel. He's a black belt now. He runs 10th Planet Van Nuys. And that was it. It was just the three of us. It was me and a brown belt jiu-jitsu and a striking coach that had only cornered once in an MMA fight before. Yeah. I mean, literally, if I look back, I'm like, what was I thinking?
How many weeks before did you go out, Dan?
4 weeks.
4 weeks.
For 4 weeks. So while I was out there, I spent a week there. I started working with Joe DeFranco as well. So I had a strength and conditioning coach, my striking coach, and then my jiu-jitsu coach. And then Dana called me when he realized my training camp was a complete shambles and I had no cash. And he was like, right, I want you to drive out to Long Island. I'm going to get you a hotel for you and your team. And I want you to start training with Matt Serra. And that was the beginning of the next part of the primetime show. I, walked out. We did the whole Arnold Schwarzenegger handshake with Matt Serra. And then I spent the last 3 weeks with him. And I'll be honest, I mean, that was really what made that fight, that training camp to me.
Those last training, because Matt's one of the legends of the game as well, and he's got a fantastic reputation along with Renzo, the jiu-jitsu guys they produce. How was training there?
It was a game changer for me. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to put up the same kind of performance that I did. And I know it wasn't a competitive fight. I was able to stay in the fight, which was about all I could do against him. I never was able to create any avenues to attack. But it was the work that I did with Matt Serra that kept me in there the distance. Because, I mean, the thing is, Matt Serra knew GSP. He knew what he was up against because he'd fought him twice. He also knew all the things that he drilled that he wouldn't have to escape. So head and arm chokes, kimuras, arm bars, back escapes.
And I mean, you walk into Matt Serra's gym and you're spoiled for choice when it comes to training partners.
Yeah.
So he brought 3 black belts in. And nobody at Matt Serra's gym's got a normal name. Everyone's got a nickname. So I had Bam Bam, Monster, and He-Man. They were the 3 black belts. And they absolutely put me through the ringer for 3 weeks. And it was the only thing that saved it was the comedy relief from Matt Serra. It was absolutely fantastic. But we had it was an amazing 3 weeks. And I was working at Matt Serra's gym with his guys. I was training at Ray Longo's gym, which at the time I didn't even realize, but Chris Weidman was sat watching me training for the fight before he started his MMA journey. It was a good time. And, Dana and the UFC had set that up for me as well, which I was very grateful for. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, I knew I was up against it. Like, there was the possibility of me winning the fight was always going to be a cuffing left hook off the side of his head, kind of like what Matt Serra did. So I always say that the best outcome for that fight is what I got. I gave everything I could, but I wasn't supposed to win.
But what I do think, you lost the fight, but I do think you probably won the respect of everybody around the world. The fact that you were so durable. There's a lot of guys would have looked for a way out of that fight, some of the positions you were in. One of the most dominant questions I've had is, how didn't your arm break? Now, I remember watching the fight and thinking, I'm one of these quite an emotional spectator, so I was like twisting my arm, thinking, come on, Dan, how did he get out of that? So, did that cause any damage to your arm long term, or you just had that ability, you're flexible and you're double jointed?
Yeah, I am kind of a bit strangely built. I mean, I think there were a lot of factors to why that armbar didn't work. I mean, you as a high level jiu-jitsu coach will know that he didn't have my arm completely trapped because his knees were too far apart. So there was some space and some gaps in his technique that could have helped him. But there are other things that, I mean, I have, because of traditional martial arts, I have calcifications on the underside of both of my elbows. Yeah. So my arms don't straighten properly anyway. There's always a slight kink in the arm. Yeah. But at the same time, I have incredibly flexible shoulders. So, like, the things that I can do with my shoulders and the stubbornness of my elbows kind of helped me out.
Yeah.
We did loads and loads of hitchhiker escape with Matt Serra. The other thing as well, and the reality is, he could have broken my arm and I wasn't really that bothered. And I also had this, what it's like when you're a fan of martial arts, you find yourself researching all kinds of unusual things. One thing that I remember reading back in the day was the Japanese military testing arm bars on cadavers, prisoners of war, cadavers, dead bodies, to see like the resistance of a joint without any physical human strength resisting it. And the one thing that they found is that breaking an arm with an arm bar is actually a very difficult thing to do. So I had that in my head at the time. I'm like, well, I'm going to see how far it'll go. Keep my elbow moving so as not to get it fully hyperextended. But honestly, the reality is, break it, I'll hit you with the other hand.
Yeah.
That was what was in my head at the time. And my missed opportunity, I don't watch the fight back, but the times I have seen it, it annoys me when I watch it. That point when I roll out of the arm and get back to my feet, if you look at the expression on my face, I'm smiling. Because the look on GSP's face is, what happened there? How did he get out of that?
Yeah.
And that moment where I should have jumped on him, I should have attacked him. I was too much, that unraveling in his head.
How was the feeling? Because, like I said, there's only a select few in the world ever get a chance to fight with the greats. There's a handful of people that people say the greatest of all time. They go, GSP is always in that conversation. And even when you fought him, and he was still, he was in his prime then, he was still regarded as one of the best that's ever done it. How did that feel? Was that a surreal moment when you sat in that octagon? Bruce Buffer is about to announce that you're fighting arguably one of the best fighters of all time for a world title in the UFC. That's an experience that a lot of people would give their right arm for. And you're one of the select few and say, I've been there and I've done it.
Yeah, it was very surreal, and I felt like I'd already kind of got inside his head a little bit. Not that I felt like he looked at me as a legit threat, but he certainly looked at me as someone that could win if I caught him clean. If I hit him with a good clean punch, I was going to hurt him.
Yeah,
and he knew that, and I could see in his eyes that he knew that, because like for as great as GSP is as a martial artist and as an athlete, like
I always break fighters down into three compartments. You're an athlete, you're a martial artist, you're a fighter. And everybody has got a different
level for each section.
Level of each one of those things, right? So for me, GSP is athlete and martial artist, and fighter slightly lower down.
Yeah, I agree.
I would say I'm the opposite end. I'm fighter, martial artist, athlete, steps down like that. So like the fighter aspect of me had the fighter aspect of GSP beat. And I knew that in his eyes. I could see that when I looked at him. So when we're facing off at the start of the fight, I can see that anxiety in his eyes. You know, I'm smiling. I'm like one of the three facets I've got you on here. I just need to make sure that we stay in that wheelhouse. But that's the thing with GSP is that's why he's so incredibly good. Is that ego doesn't come into play. There's no I need to prove myself against this guy in a particular way. It's right. These are the problems I've got. How do I solve these problems with the skills I've got? And that was what was evident in the fight. Like he knew ways he could have let me into the fight, and he wasn't going to do it. He was fast. His decision making was on point. I wouldn't even necessarily say he was particularly strong, but he was explosive, and he changed direction very quickly. Like if you listen to the way that Danaher explains his game when he's talking to Joe Rogan. His expertise is changing direction very, very quickly. And that's partly down to decision making. Like that three-piece combination that he uses when he took me down every time with it. Shoots him for a double leg, runs the pipe on the single, then goes to the knee tap. And all three of those are interchangeable, one after another. Doesn't matter which direction he goes, one of those three is always going to work. And because he'd refined all of his takedowns to those three particular things, he could hit them so fast I couldn't keep up.
Yeah,
that was the thing that stood out to me. Is like as soon as I'm starting to think about defending one, he's already switched to the next and the next. And what was even more, I mean, it was a real privilege to fight him. But what was even more a privilege is that like he called me to go and help him in training camps after that fight.
So
you know, like
that's a compliment then as well, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. You know, so I learned much more about myself as a martial artist by knowing how they prepared for me. I had great conversations with John Danaher while I was up there, and he said, you know, when we fought you, this is what we did. This is what we expected from you. This is what we saw when we researched you. So, I mean, I learned so much just from going up there and hanging out with those guys and seeing what they do to prepare.
With so, you know, the highest of highs, you're fighting for the world title. You've given a fantastic account of yourself against one of the best to ever do it. Then you had a pretty poor patch. You've gone 4 fights without a win. Were you under pressure then? Did the UFC at the end of that fourth loss say, you know, this next fight is going to be make or break? It could end your contract. Were you feeling the pressure? And what do you think led to those 4 losses? Was it a confidence thing? Was it just didn't get the rub of the green during the fights? Was it a mental state after the defeat against GSP? Did any of those things factor in?
I think a lot of those things factored in. I mean, there were a lot of reasons why. And obviously, you know, when you're in it and when you're looking back on it, you're constantly trying to figure it out and assess it. And I have a pretty good understanding of that time in my life, I think, and I can see what I did wrong and the things that have played into the things that I did wrong, and also, you know, the things that were happening around me. The UFC never contacted me and said, "This is your last fight. You're going to get cut. You need this fight. You need this win." I think everybody knew that. You know, you pick up 3 losses and you're on the chopping block. I think it helped the fact that the 3 losses on my record were, the UFC champ, the former WEC champ, and then the biggest puncher in the division. So, like, it wasn't like I'd had an easy run.
No, not at all. Yeah.
So I think that helped in a lot of ways, but I was constantly hearing the fans' opinions. Like, Twitter was big at the time. You know, the forums were still pretty lively. So I was constantly saying 3 losses, that's it, get rid of him. You know, like everybody's calling for your head on a spike. You pick 3 losses up. Doesn't matter who you lose to. So going back to your original question, the reason it happened, coming off the GSP fight, I knew that I was outmatched in certain areas, but I felt like he'd given me enough respect in other areas of the game for me to go, okay, my striking's all right. I need to supplement that with my wrestling. And once I've supplemented that with my wrestling, I'm going to get back to a title shot and do better. Was in my head. I didn't feel like I could not ever beat GSP. I just didn't feel like I had the skills at that time to do it. Yeah. And then, as you know, after a title fight, the UFC give you a bit of time off. I had about 4 months. So as soon as the event was over, I took a drive down the East Coast, spent a bit of time. I went to Disney World, and just kind of had a bit of a break. A part of the struggle with the GSP training camp is that I'd lost my grandfather 6 weeks before the fight, and he was always a major contributor to my martial arts journey. Like, he started Taekwondo with me when he was 60. And he retired when he was 65. He had a good 5 years of training, but we shared that time, and he was a key player in keeping me involved in martial arts. And whenever, and I'm sure you fulfill this role for Jack. For me, if ever I had a fight coming up and I was in a bit of an anxious place with it, I could just go up to my grandparents' house. I'd go and sit on their sofa. They'd make me a cup of tea.
Yeah.
And it was a bit of a reality check, but at the same time, like, my granddad's unshakable confidence in me was to an extent my confidence.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? So
and it would impact on that mindset as well. Just a few words off him and brings you back to a positive place in the mind.
This is it. And it was like, and the thing is with my granddad, he was a very matter of fact kind of person. Like, there was no flair, nothing fancy about him at all. He was a very to the point, matter of fact. And I just found it very relaxing and reassuring. And he'd say things like, I'd be sitting there and he's like, how's training going? I said, yeah, training's going well. He said, are you feeling all right for the fight? Yeah, I'm feeling all right. I'm feeling pretty good. Obviously, in my head, I'm sitting on his sofa because I'm not. I'm not feeling good at all. I'm feeling quite anxious. But then he'll just kind of casually sit back, and it's, well, him that's got to be bloody worried, isn't it? I can hear his voice in my head. The tones, it's him that's got to be worried. He's he don't even know what's coming. He doesn't even know what's coming. And I get in my car and I'm heading home thinking that's exactly what I needed. He has no idea what's coming, And I think the time I needed that more than ever, it wasn't there. Like, for the first 10, it was a 16-week training camp. For the first 10 weeks of training camp, I was going from the gym to the hospital and back because he was in intensive care. And it was, I was in the room. Some days he was awake, other days he wasn't. But I'm doing interviews. Like, I'm stepping out the hospital room doing. It was just like I felt like the strength of my foundation had been shaken, and there was nothing to replace it. And then coming out of the GSP fight, I'd not really mourned him. So there was a process of mourning him going on. There was also a process of everyone coming up to me going, "Oh, dude, you did so well against GSP. A bit of takedown defense, and you'll be the world champion." And if you hear that kind of positive reinforcement enough for a few months, you start to believe it yourself a little.
Yeah.
And when I got co-main event against Condit, I had no respect for him. And that was my error as a martial artist. That was my ego getting out of control and me not giving him the respect that he deserved. I didn't respect his punching power. I didn't think he could take me down. I didn't think he could submit me. I expected to be fitter and stronger and more powerful. Like, I literally discredited him in every facet of the game. And that's why I paid, is because mentally I wasn't in the right place. Physiologically, probably I would still say that's the best shape I've ever been in that fight. Like, I look at myself in the corner and go, I was in fantastic. But psychologically,
I see it. I've seen it as a coach for many years, where you'll have somebody that's athletically and physically in their prime, but mentally they just missing out. And that's the difference sometimes between winning and losing a fight. Becoming the champion is the mindset is key to everything. And I know you're very zen-like in your approach to life and martial arts, and you've probably, the older you've got, the more experience you become, and you can reflect back and know that's something you would have addressed if you could relive that time again, So you've had the 4 defeats, and then they've matched you with, at the time, one of the most notorious strikers in the division, Ludwig. So I remember that fight coming up, and how Jack was a young kid, and I remember thinking to myself, this is a fight, Dan can beat this guy. A lot of pressure on you probably at that point. 4 fights in a row you've lost. It's a realistic thought that you could probably lose your contract if you lose low, and then boom, you go out, you do the job. How did that feel? That must have been a sense of relief. Yeah,
it was, because I guess I'd kind of put more pressure on myself going into that fight as well, but I did that intentionally, because so GSP, then Condit, then Anthony Johnson, and the Anthony Johnson fight just kind of broke me mentally. I remember sitting in my dressing room after that fight
with my hand in a bucket because I dislocated my thumb during the fight, put it back in. And I just said to my coach, I just said, I'm done. I'm not enjoying this anymore. I'm just not enjoying it. That was my third loss. And in my head, I was going into that fight thinking if I lose this, I'm done. The UFC will cut me. So I was kind of half out the door. I was already thinking about going back to university and studying philosophy.
And again, mentally carrying a huge amount of pressure with you into that fight.
Yeah. And I was coming off my first knockout of my career. I was fighting a guy that had knocked everybody out in the division. So I expected him to stand and trade with me. And I just wanted a war because that was where my mind was at. And because I didn't get it, that was when after that fight, I came out and started calling for Lytle. Because when I realized the UFC weren't going to cut me, I just thought, well, I've got one more. I've got the golden ticket in my back pocket. I'll go out with a bang. And I knew Chris Lytle would brawl with me. So that was just, I didn't get into the fight with Chris Lytle with any intention of winning. I just wanted a fight.
Yeah.
And I think that showed in my performance. I was taking more punches than I ever have done before. I made reckless decisions. I jumped into a guillotine right at the end of it for whatever reason. And then if you look at my face at the press conference after that fight, I'm kind of laughing. I'm like, well, it was a good run. That was it, because I'm expecting 4 fights in a row. I'm definitely getting cut.
You resigned yourself to being finished with the company, yeah.
But then at the press conference, a tweet comes through from Lorenzo, and Lorenzo said, we're not cutting him. I like guys that fight like that. We're not cutting him. So then I've got this surge of confidence that I've got one more shot. And now it wasn't about me. It was about justifying Lorenzo's decision. Because I've always respected Lorenzo and the way that he conducted himself and ran the UFC and all that kind of thing. The way he treated me and the fighters. I always felt like he had a vested interest in me. And when he did that, I was like, that's proof of it.
Yeah.
So I decided, I looked at everything that was going on at the time, where I was, what was working, what wasn't. I'd already moved to Vegas at that point, but the people I was working with were just not good people. I had Roy Nelson in my corner, and I don't know Roy now, but at the time he wasn't a good person, and he caused a lot of problems for me. And I knew that everything needed to change. So fortunately, I'd made a few good contacts in Vegas at the time, and Frank Mir was one of them. Ricky Lundell was another, and Jimmy Gifford was another. And they were the 3 guys that I brought in to help me out for my next fight. And it was, I'm taking 9 months off. I'm going to give this everything I've got. And this is the last one. And that was my thought. And when they matched me up against Ludwig, like you said, my first thought is he's a hell of a striker. It's a very winnable fight for me.
Yeah, great fight stylistically.
Ludwig. The true challenge was, it was Dwayne Ludwig. I remember him on King of the Cage. He was one of my favorites. Yeah. That little sidestep to the head kick he used to do, I'm like, this guy's got Thai boxing down for MMA. So it was bittersweet because I actually didn't want to end his UFC career, but I also had to save my own.
Yeah.
And as good as it was to get that victory, and as sweet as the victory was because I knew the technique I wanted to win the fight with, and I did. The downside was it was Ludwig, and he was always one of my favorites. But then he did go on to become one of the best coaches in the world. So
with that, then you fought somebody that goes under the radar, I feel, but I felt at the time was a really, really talented fighter, was Amir Sadala from the Ultimate Fighter winner. And again, great performance. You come away with a win. So now all of a sudden you're on a 2-fight winning streak. Spring in your step, I'm guessing. And then unfortunately you come down with I've written it down somewhere. What's it called? The Wolff. Yeah. Do you want to explain to people what it's called?
Yeah, it was initially when it was diagnosed. It's called Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome.
Wolff-Parkinson-White, yeah.
The thing is though, Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome is something that affects people, and when it's a syndrome, it means that you know about it. Like, it affects you. You have symptoms like palpitations, like rapid heart increases. Like, people that have it can literally be sat on the sofa and their heart rate goes from 60 to 150, like for no reason. I've never ever had any kind of problems, health issues. I mean, I've done 300 odd fights and my heart's been strong. Never had a problem. So I'd come off the Sadala fight and was preparing to fight Matt Brown in California. This was April 20th of 2013 was the fight was set. California requires different testing. And one of the tests that they require is an ECG, which I'd never had to have done before. And when I was in Vegas, I went into the hospital to have the tests done. And the doctor said, oh, there's an abnormality here. We've got to do more tests. And I was 4 weeks out from the fight. So in my head, I'm like, this is an unnecessary stress. I don't want to be dealing with this. Just do what you need to do. Get me cleared for the fight and let me get on with it. Because, I got 2 fights back. I was fighting Matt Brown. I wanted to fight Matt Brown.
Yeah.
You know,
Another big fight, huge fight.
Yeah, right. You know, he's the immortal, and I always wanted to use the line out of 300. We'll put his name to the test. You know, never got the opportunity to, but it was a good fight. I genuinely didn't think there was going to be anything that was going to derail me from getting to the octagon. And then the second time I went into the hospital, they did the test, and the guy said, "Look, I can't clear you to fight. It's showing a second heartbeat on your ECG. So the only way for us to understand what's going on is to go into your heart and have a look around." And straight away, I'm like, well, I've never had any kind of symptoms or side effects or anything. And now you want to go into my heart 4 weeks from a fight and have a look around, but I can still fight in 4 weeks' time. And if there's a problem in my heart, then what they can do is basically what they were looking for is a group of cells that are producing the second heartbeat. And what their solution is that they electrocute those cells, they kill the cells. So then you've only got the one heartbeat. And the danger is with 2 heartbeats, 2 groups of cells, is that it can short circuit and cause cardiac arrest. That was the danger. That was the reason they didn't want me to fight, is because I could literally be completely healthy and all of a sudden my heart just switches off. But people that have these ablations to deal with it are people that have had problems all the way through, and I never had. So I wanted a second opinion. And I spoke to my doctor in the UK, and he said, just don't touch it. He said, most of the time, when people have these treatments, they have to go back and have it done again and again and again. And because it wasn't something that was affecting me, the idea of so what, they were going to go into my carotid artery and my femoral artery and like basically feed cables into my heart to have a look around. But then they were going to stitch me up and let me fight 4 weeks later. I'm like, you really don't understand what this sport's all about.
Yeah.
And it derailed me. The UFC wouldn't let me compete unless I got proper clearance to fight or had the ablation, which is really the only route I was being given the option of. So I didn't. I was removed from the fight. And my plan was to find a cardiac specialist that would basically educate me on what was going on. But before I knew it, I was into commentary duties, and the UFC had me on a full schedule. So it set me back a couple of years.
Yeah.
I did manage to find the guy, though, and I am cleared and healthy now. So
have you had surgery, Dan, or no? One of my students, Christian Chard, sent a question because he has the same syndrome. He's had it all his life. So you say you're cleared now. Have things changed then on the medical side of competing? So if you wanted to fight now, you're cleared medically. You can go. So let's touch on that then, because the internet is rife at the moment with Dan Hardy coming back, and there's been Cerrone thrown in. I've seen Pettis put in there. Now, one of my guys that trains with me, Grant Elliott, put a post up one day this week on the link when I said that I was interviewing, and said for him the perfect fight would be Matt Brown. Now, you've just touched on that Matt Brown was somebody that you were scheduled to fight before. Is this something you're serious about possibly coming? And I've seen an interview where you said you're not looking for a title run. It would be against another probably old school guy, excuse the term, that you're going to match up well with, have a really competitive bout. Are you serious about it?
Yeah, I would. It's something that's always been with me. I never went out on my terms. If I'd have decided before the Amir Sadallah fight that was going to be my last one, I could have retired in my hometown. Yeah. Home main event. It was a great card. Struve knocked out Stipe Miocic in the main event. It was a good card, but I wasn't done on that night. In my head, I was moving forward to another fight. In my head, I was going to have another run at the welterweight title, which was the truth. I was going to have another 18 months, and then I was going to retire. And Matt Brown was kind of the beginning of that journey. The reality now, though, is that I realized looking back, I wasn't the best version of myself at welterweight because I was too big. I was too heavy. I was smaller during the Sadallah fight, but I still wasn't the version of myself that I wanted to be. I never feel like I've given a good example of what I'm capable of in the octagon, which is what is driving me to fight again. And I also know that the weight, when I was fighting at welterweight, I was walking around at like 210, 215. I was cutting too much weight. I was too big, too strong, too heavy, too slow. But everybody at welterweight was. It was, like John Fitch was a giant. Mike Swick coming down from welterweight. Anthony Johnson cutting from 215. Like everybody was big. So I I kind of fell into that groove and did the same thing. Whereas in actuality, if I go back to the old Cage Warriors days, when I was walking onto the scales at 77 kilos, I was lightning fast.
Yeah,
I was much faster. I was much more agile. My technique was better. So to come back now, I mean, Matt Brown, of course, the poor guy, I think, needs to retire, if I'm honest. But the likes of Pettis and Cowboy, the reason that they're good is because physiologically we're a very similar size. I respect both of those guys as far as their skill sets and what they've contributed to the sport, what they've achieved. Their names as well carry so much weight.
Yeah, I agree.
And they're also, neither of those guys is going to find themselves in a title picture at any point in the future. Like, I know Pettis keeps talking about 55 and this and that. I think he's daydreaming if he thinks he's going to get back to a title fight with the guys in this division.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at, Charles Oliveira, Dan Hooker, even the likes of Alia Quinter and Paul Felder.
Yeah.
So I feel like Pettis and Cowboy are in a very similar stage to their career that I am. The difference is that they've been fighting for the last 7 years and I haven't.
Yeah.
So, Pettis has had, what is he, 7 and 8 now. So he's had 15 fights since the last time I fought, and Cowboy's at about 400. So I mean, I'm interested in the difference between, I've literally been at MMA university for the last 7 years. I've watched more MMA than I've trained. But at the same time, my skill set has not slipped too much where I feel like I can transfer that very well to actual performance. Whereas those guys, I feel like they've been through the ringer so many times now that they're starting to slip down that side of the mountain.
Yeah.
So I feel like the benefits that they have and the benefits that I have kind of balance out, and we're on a much more even footing.
Have you spoken to the UFC? Have you spoken to the matchmakers or Dana? Have they? What's their thoughts on it? Is it something they're keen to do?
I've spoken to Dana a couple of times, but not for a while. But Dana's of the opinion that why would you? Why would you fight? Like, you've got a job for life here. You're an analyst. You're a commentator. Like, why would you? Is Dana's perspective. And I understand his perspective, and I appreciate the fact that he says I've got a job for life because, I love what I do. And
but
I am
fighter first and foremost, aren't you? So it's always, I'm 48 years of age, and I would give anything just to have that buzz of being able to compete in an MMA fight again. But I'm an old man, and I know time is passing. But for yourself, you're still fit, young. You've got your senses around you. You don't want to look back in 10 years when you are my age and go, I wish.
And the thing is, I mean, I've just literally just turned 38 a week ago. I've not, I've never had a surgery. I've had 5 stitches in my whole life. I've been cut once. I haven't drank in 20 odd years. I eat well. I look after myself. I sleep well. Like, as far as physiologically goes, I'm not 38 when I compare myself to Cowboy and Pettis.
Yeah.
Like, they're old men. Like, fighter years and dog years are very similar, I always say.
Yeah.
Like, Cowboy might be 35, but in fighter years he's about 78. I've not aged the same speed as these guys, and I feel like experience and knowledge and fight IQ is so much more prevalent in MMA today than it was back in the day. Like, and I think heavyweight is a good example of that. Like, the older heavyweights, the ones that have maybe got a bit of wear and tear, but have also got lots of experience. The likes of Alistair Overeem can take a massive shot in the first round and come back in the second. You know what I mean? It's I have that in my back pocket because I have the experience, but I don't have that wear and tear. So I feel like if I could get in, even if it's one more time, if it's 2 more times, if I get Pettis and Cowboy, I fight twice and then I'm done. I feel like those 2 guys would give me a good test, would also allow me to really communicate what I'm capable of.
Would you want it in the UK?
Honestly, I don't really mind. I mean, obviously, before the whole coronavirus thing came about, I was thinking about venues. Vegas is a very easy place to compete because I know the city. I know, like, I've got my people around me there. I could construct the end of a training camp quite comfortably and not have to change too much. I've always wanted to fight in New York. I mean, if I could fight Madison Square Garden, it'd be a dream come true. Just, because then I've done hometown, I've done London, I've done Vegas, so that'd be a dream. But then, to fight in London, to fight anywhere in the UK in front of a local crowd.
For me, I would love to see it in the UK because I think the fans would come out and, the reception you get would be up there with any fighter that's fought in the UK in the past. So 1 on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 no chance, 10 it's going to happen. Where are we at with you getting this fight?
I'm at a 9. I'm at a 9. Yeah, I mean, I've had conversations with the UFC. They've thrown, I mean, and they're all kind of speculative over a dinner table kind of conversations. Nothing like we're talking about putting words on paper.
Yeah.
But all the conversations have been, you know, how about this guy? How about this guy? I mean, I've had loads of names thrown at me from various different UFC execs, the likes, and I've turned loads down. You know, Joe Lozon, Jim Miller, Gilbert Melendez, blah, like loads of cool names. I don't want to fight any of those guys. Not interested. And this is the thing now. I'm not interested in just fighting whoever. Like, I want to fight specific people because I respect them and I know it's going to be a good fight. I'm not interested in getting back in a cycle of, you know, who's next.
Yeah, of course.
I'm not. You know, even if I have one more fight, you know, two old school guys go out there and throw down, kind of like Pettis and Cowboy did the other week.
Yeah,
it was a nothing fight, but for me, it was one of the most exciting on the card because
and a lot of interest in it as well. You know, so
yeah.
Right. So that's your fight career pretty much in a nutshell. We've gone quite in depth there, haven't we? We've gone from your very first fight, your cage. How did the commentary gig come about? Did you pursue that, or did somebody contact you?
That was Dana. That was Dana White. And this was probably a month after I'd been pulled out of the Matt Brown fight. I was trained with Jimmy Gifford at the time, who was Jimmy Gifford was my striking coach, but he kind of oversaw my training camp, and he was also interesting little fact. You remember when Dana was going to fight Tito? They were going to have a boxing match.
Yeah.
Well, Jimmy Gifford was brought out from Boston to Vegas to train Giff for that fight. They started preparing. The fight never came about. And Dana kept Giff in Vegas and just started bringing MMA fighters to him. So, like, Giff's trained everybody, and he's a fantastic coach. But he also holds pads for Lorenzo. So he'd said to me, "Hey, Lorenzo wants to see you in his office later today, just to kind of check up and go and, you know, see how things are." So I drove over to the old UFC offices, had a chat with him for about 20 minutes or so, and just kind of reassured him that I was okay. And he asked me if I go out to California to see his family doctor to find out what was going on. And he also said, "Dana wants to speak to you." Well, fair enough. Didn't really think anything about it, to be honest. But as I was walking out of the offices, this huge Monster Energy drinks truck pulls up, a big stretch Hummer, and Dana gets out of it. I mean, it was literally like out of a movie. Dana gets out of it, walks over to, "Oh, just the man I want to see. I've got a proposition for you." Not even, "Are you interested? Would you like to? Do you think you can? I want you to move back to the UK. I want you to speak for the UFC I want you to speak on behalf of the UFC in Europe, and I want you to commentate." I'd never even tried commentating. I don't know why Dana decided he wanted to try me out at it, but he did.
And it's been a brilliant choice on his part. Again, this is why he's the boss.
Well,
he sees things that we don't, maybe.
I suppose. I mean, I think to an extent it was a lot of the media training that I was doing, because, you know, when I was fighting for a world title, it wasn't, "What do you think to GSP? How's he dangerous? What's he going to do?" It was, "What's mixed martial arts? What's legal? You know, can you bite? Can you headbutt?" You know, so I'd gone through the rounds and done all the stupid answering the general media questions to kind of educate people. So I think maybe they'd seen me do that and thought to themselves, "Well, you know, maybe there's another role he can fulfill here." But as far as commentating, that was a huge risk that they took. And I did a screen test with the good John Gooden, which was awesome. And then they brought him out to Vegas, and we sat Octagon side to do a test run when, so it was DC against Patrick Cummins and Ronda against Sarah McMahon was our test run. And we did a quick test run, not on air or anything. And then the next event was UFC London. That was the first event that we commentated. Completely thrown at the deep end.
Yeah, John's somebody I'm going to get on as well. I've known John a long time from the early days when he was commentating back in Portsmouth on Shotgun and Cage Warriors, and I did a podcast with John. I'd have to try and drive. It must be 12 years ago. That's how far back. Yeah, he was doing his own part. But your relationship with John, I think it's a perfect fit. I think the commentary team. For me, I enjoy, whether it's because I know you both personally, but I enjoy you guys more than any other commentators on the scene. Did you know John before you started working together, or was you just put together?
No, I did. I mean, I was aware of him as a Cage Warriors commentator because I was still following the local scene. I knew he was very good at what he did. I had a couple of screen tests. I had one with John, and there was another chap I did a screen test with, which he was very good, but it just not for that particular role. And I think people still don't quite understand the commentary roles and how it's divided up. But it works so well because John is so particularly good at what he does. And I absolutely couldn't do John's job.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, yeah.
You know what I mean? So the first time I spoke to John was the night before we did the screen test, and he called me up and he just said, "Hey, we've got a screen test tomorrow. I just wanted a bit of a catch up, just to let you know who I am and what I've been doing." And it was cool. We chatted for about 10 minutes, and then the next day, as soon as we started doing it, I knew his knowledge. I knew he had passion for the sport. I could tell. You know, he'd done his research. He'd come prepared. He showed up with his bow tie on, you know what I mean? He took it very seriously. And it just clicked. And I think that's what you get with a good commentary team is the missing elements of my character and my personality are made up for in John and vice versa. If you see us walk into the commentary table before an event, you can see how different we are.
Yeah.
John's got his folder, he's got his snacks, he's got his green apple to cut down the phlegm in his throat. You know what I mean? He's got chewing gum and snacks and vegan protein bars and highlighters laid out, make sure all his pens are working, and he is legit prepared in every way he possibly can be. I show up an hour early to the event, I shadow box in the octagon, and then I show up to the table with no notes. That's just the way that I do it.
Yeah. So
very different, but it works because we've fulfilled very different roles.
And Felder's dropped into that team nice as well. It tends to be the three of you, and I think all three of you have different strengths that all complement each other. So I think it's a great team. I just want to finish up. Thanks for taking time today. I do want to finish up just talking a little bit about your team as well. You and Jimmy have started your own MMA team, Hardy Wallhead. How did that come about? Was that something you've always wanted to do, create your own team?
Yeah, it is. I mean, people have always assumed that Roughhouse was a gym, and it was never. Roughhouse was never a gym. We were always a team, like a Ronin team. Like we would wander from one gym to another and prepare wherever we could. But like Roughhouse was a mentality instead of a team, and we always kind of felt like the time would come when Roughhouse would become a team, would become a gym, a facility. And the truth is, I always knew, and I still know, that Jimmy will be a better coach than he was a fighter. Jimmy was a great fighter, but the strengths of Jimmy's character are exactly what you were talking about earlier on. Knowing each individual in the gym and what they need to make them a better martial artist. And Jimmy can communicate so well with people. So it was kind of accidental, to be honest. So Jimmy was in the UFC. He'd signed his UFC contract, and he had 2 fights in the UFC and lost them both, which it's unfortunate because no one will ever, and you'll know this as well, no one will ever see how good Jimmy Wallhead really is.
Oh, he's fantastic.
You know? He's without a doubt one of the best martial artists that I have ever worked with. Like, no matter what weight class, style, or anything, like he can push me in every range of the game. He's absolutely fantastic. But his UFC career just didn't quite work out for him. He had 2 losses that just, you bring both of those guys to the gym and Jimmy throws them around.
Yeah.
And then he tested positive for something called Osarium, which is a lot of fighters have struggled with this. It was a tainted supplement. It was some amino acids that he took, and Osarium was in this amino acid. Like Tom Lawler was one of the guys that tested positive. There's a load of guys that are struggling with this. And the UFC are getting on top of it now. But unfortunately, when it happened to Jimmy, USADA was still trying to get their head around this thing. So Jimmy was suspended and couldn't fight. And he was a bit lost, didn't really know what to do. And I thought to myself, well, now's a good time. Now's a good time. We're both in a position where we're around a bit more. Jimmy was already coaching. He had a good squad of fighters. And a lot of Cage Warriors guys were coming to Jimmy for help. The likes of Dean Truman. We're coming to Jimmy just for training, sparring experience. So I thought it was less about us setting up a gym and more about me setting up a gym where Jimmy could really thrive. So that's what we did. We set up Hardy Wallhead. And I mean, we've got kids classes, beginners classes, we've got, jiu-jitsu, we've got striking.
I mean, obviously it's not even anywhere comparable to your setup, which is absolutely fantastic, and I cannot wait to come and check it out.
Yeah.
But we've got a little space, which is good for us to grow a small team, and we will move.
The facility looks lovely. I've seen it on, I've seen the videos you guys have put up and Jimmy's put up. You've got good numbers there. To be honest, anybody in that area looking for MMA training, I mean, come on, you got 2 UFC vets. A legend of the game. Even though Jimmy didn't have a great time in UFC, he's still regarded as a UK legend on the MMA scene. Why would you want to train anywhere else? So have you got any? Throw a name at me that we need to be keeping an eye out. Some youngster, not a set pro. Have you got any young amateurs coming through that you think is destined to have a really good career from your team?
We have quite a few guys that are floating around. I mean, we have a kid that's just made his debut. His name's Miles Muncy. We call him Pumba, and he's one of those kids that when he showed up in the gym, we had to keep an eye on him because he's naturally a fighter.
Yeah.
You're doing light sparring and drilling, and you have to pull him back a little bit.
I got a few of those.
There's no venom or animosity in him.
No.
He runs high, he idles at 60 miles an hour. So he's definitely one to keep an eye on, and he's very, very young in his game. But I'm excited to see him develop. We've got other kids that are developing in various different ways. And the thing is as well, it's not even just about martial arts. So we have this kid at the gym called Riley, he loves jiu-jitsu. His MMA game's coming on, but now he's starting to study under the Raptors. So he's learning video editing as well. Yeah. It's not just martial arts, we just, people can find anything to do in our gym that will add something to their game. The thing is with the amateur squad, I tend to leave Jimmy to work more with them, and because I'm not around as much, I like to step in for the pro squad and just kind of add a few little bits to people's games. So I'll go in and work with Terry Brazier or Adam Amasinga, and Adam's the one I'm really keeping my eye on at the moment. Adam Amasinga's got so much potential, and he's not even realised his own potential yet, which is terrifying.
He's a great talent. I've watched Adam quite a few times live. He's a cracking talent.
Yeah, he's just and again, we go back to the same thing we were saying. You've got a gym full of fighters. You can't teach everyone the same thing.
Yeah.
So I look at Adam Amasinga and I look at Terry Brazier, and they are opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to fighting.
Yeah.
I can say to Terry Brazier, right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to walk this guy down. We're going to trap him up against a corner post, and we're going to drag him down and maul them. And Terry Brazier, military personality, he will do that to the book. Adam Amasinga, I like to throw challenges out to him. What happens if you step this way? What does the guy do? What happens if you throw that particular feint? What do we expect from that guy? So I'm enjoying the challenge of learning how to coach.
Yeah.
The truth is, I'm not a very good coach. I can communicate, but as far as actual coaching goes, Jimmy is head and shoulders above me. I'm the guy that comes in and just does the little tweaks. Jimmy's the coach, so I still learn from Jimmy when it comes to coaching. I just kind of drop in every now and then and sprinkle a little bit of fairy dust on the top.
Brilliant. Right, so we'll look out for those guys. Just a couple of questions to wrap up. You've been on the Cage Warriors scene since they come back to Wales and invested. What's your thoughts on the Welsh scene at the moment?
You guys are holding it down. You guys are holding it together. Like the amount of times that we go to a Cage Warriors event in Wales, and it is the standout event of the year for me. Like the times that we've been to, the arena and the crowd, the atmosphere, especially when Jack's walking out. Like we have a great video on our YouTube channel of you guys.
Yeah, regular. Well, it's in like slow motion, and they're
love it.
Oh, it's brilliant! It's brilliant. I've got it saved on my channel. Funny enough.
Because the thing is with that, like, it's an experience that most people won't ever get. Like a lot of those people in the arena, they'll remember being on the side of the barriers as Jack was coming out, going, Jack Shaw's on fire and singing and chanting, but you never get to see it from his perspective.
Yeah.
And when
James and the team did a brilliant job of that. I thought for me, it's my favorite video of anything that we've done. That the hairs go up on the back of my neck. I feel my stomach starting to knot up, and I think the fight's over. I'm still getting nervous when I'm watching it. Absolute brilliant bit of a thing. But like I said, we've got 4 guys in the UFC now from Wales. We've got Liu Long doing really well on Bellator. And there's a lot of good young up-and-comers. We got Mason Jones, we got Oban Elliott, we got Ben Ellis, and these guys are all, I think, destined. So I think we're in a good place at the time. You've probably seen great changes because you were there from that little show in Newport Centre when Jack made his debut for the organisation to where we are now. I think, you know, I'm really proud of what we've developed as a nation, to be honest. And I think for too long we were unfashionable and we were forgotten about. But the guys are doing well now.
The one guy that always represented Wales so well, Paul Jenkins.
Oh, Jenks, yeah.
I tell you what, because I had my first fight and I lost my first fight, but I'd already booked myself in to fight Paul Jenkins in my second fight. I mean, Paul Jenkins would fight anybody. His Cage Warriors handle was records for DJs. Hands of Stone.
Hands of Stone, yeah. He's doing well, Paul, as a coach. I don't know if you said, but he was my first podcast on the series. So if you get a chance, have a look at it. It's interesting because he talks about the old days. He speaks about yourself, Paul Sutherland, and different fights. I think he talks about Lee Doski as well. But he's doing well as a coach now as well. You know, he's got a good, solid team down there. And he's starting to bring some good fighters through. You know, and I say to everybody, you can't buy the experience that man brings to the table.
No, absolutely not. And you can't. I mean, the role that Paul Jenkins fulfilled back in the old MMA days, those guys don't really exist anymore.
No. And I had this conversation with him, Dan, where he was a journeyman, but he was a journeyman that could win any fight. Whoever you went in, you would always think Jenkins can win this fight. He's finished his Sherdog profile. He's on 99 professional fights.
Right.
So he was in talks to have his 100th fight. He was telling me on this that there was three events that agreed for him to fight on. But then obviously the lockdown has come down, so he's on hold at the moment. But he's desperate to get that 100th pro fight, and he's definitely going to call it a day then. You know.
Brilliant.
Matchmaker for the day is a question I always finish with. So Dana's pulled you in. He says, Dan, you're the matchmaker for the day. You've got an unlimited budget. What would be your dream fight that you could put together?
Oh, that's a good question. See, the thing is, I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to this kind of stuff because I don't go for the big. I want to see John Jones fight Ngannou or Stipe. I mean, of course, don't get me wrong. Those fights are on. I'll watch them, but I get more excited about seeing two exciting prospects coming through that I want to see fight. And when I'm saying prospects, I'm still talking about guys in the top 10, just guys that have not had a title shot yet. Like the two for me right now, there are two particular fighters in the lightweight division, Dan Hooker and Charles Oliveira.
Yeah.
If I could make any fight in the UFC, that's the fight I'm making.
That's the fight. I two fantastic talents, but for me, Oliveira, I think, has developed so much the last few fights, and I think he's a problem for anybody. He for me is the dark horse in that division, and he could pull it out of the bag. Which fighter in the UK do you feel has got a chance of getting the next title shot?
Mate, that's an easy question. And if you see any of my top 5 prospects of 2020 or 2021, you'll see Jack pop up every time.
Jack pop up.
I'm not saying this because we're on the podcast together. Genuinely, Jack is the next title contender from this. Even if he's not the next one to get a shot, he's the only person in the country right now I feel could be a world champion in the UFC.
Yeah. How do you feel? Because I feel that he's not getting the respect he deserves. Leon Edwards. I feel that Leon seems to not be having any luck whatsoever at the moment. I mean, he was due to fight Woodley. That's fallen through. Woodley's taking a fight with Gilbert Burns. For me, I think, again, Leon has got the potential where he could upset anybody in that division, you know. So, and I do think that the fighting winning streak he's on, he does deserve that title shot sooner.
Yeah, I agree. I think the thing that holds Leon back, I think he's over analysis. I think he's got a very high fight IQ and he's got a lot of skills in his game, but I don't think he has anybody that helps him kind of direct them into a finish. Like the thing that we see from Leon are so many things that he could do to finish a fight, but then like going the distance with Cowboy over 5 rounds.
Yeah.
That's a fight that Leon needed to finish.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Like the thing is with Jack, like when I watch Jack fight, I know what he's trying to achieve. Like he has a very refined path to victory, and he's so good at it that even if the person he's up against knows what he's doing, they very rarely are able to slow him down.
Yeah.
Like since he stepped up to the UFC, I mean, it might take him a little bit longer to get to where he wants to, but he's never in a rush, and he always gets there in the end. Yeah. And I feel like because he's got, and this is one of the benefits of having your father as your coach, I think, is you guys have got such an incredible relationship that he has that person always that he can bounce ideas off and give him the truth, and can also help him shape his game in the right way.
Yeah.
I feel like Leon's lacking that individial.
And I think, and again, I think what you're saying there with Leon, he coaches himself a lot as well, doesn't he? He doesn't have a specific head coach that, I'll say it how it is. In my gym, I'm the boss. There's nothing I'll take on board. I've got a great coaching team around me, but you cannot have the fighters dictating to the coaching team. And we've had lots of arguments and lots of rows, but what we say as a coaching team, that's final. If that's not for you, you need to find another gym to train at. And I think that keeps you grounded and keeps you molded, and and I think Leon could probably do with somebody coming in as a head coach and as you say, giving him a little bit of direction. I think it's a really good call, Dan.
Yeah, I think it's just the thing is I look at the Renegade team and I see a lot of similarities with where they're at and where Roughhouse was back in the day.
Yeah,
and I look at all the Roughhouse guys, and every single one of us, if we'd have been in your gym with your setup and you as a head coach, like we would have gotten a lot further. Because a lot of the onus of what direction are we walking would have been taken off us because we'd have had someone to do it for us.
Yeah.
But because we didn't, and because Leon doesn't, like over-analysis becomes an issue. And I think it's more of an issue with guys that have got more abilities to finish a fight, but less, less physical attributes. Let me explain what I'm saying with this. Paul Daly, for example, no matter what Paul Daly did in his game, the left hook was always going to be the finishing punch. Yeah. So his whole game was built around the left hook. I'm not a heavy puncher, so I could knock somebody out with a left hook, but I had to make sure it was correct. I could also knock them out with a kick to the head or a leg kick or you know what I mean? I had a lot of options, but the problem is when you have loads of options, like Leon does, you go,
yeah, it's a good show.
Where do I walk, And I think that is part of the problem is sometimes you need the options taken off the table. And I think someone with natural punching power or natural physical strength, they naturally remove some of those options themselves because they know what they're working with. Whereas someone like Leon and someone like myself, who you can kind of find finishers, you just got to make sure you're focused on it. It's very much the same with Jack. I feel like Jack, if he decides he wants to be a kickboxer and knock people out, he can gear his game towards that. If he wants to be a ground and pound fighter and gear his game towards that, he can do. But like the fact that he's got you and the team around him to kind of help him narrow those decision making down is what's going to make him a great. Whereas other people, they might fall along the wayside because they're overthinking.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I appreciate the compliment. Again, I can't thank you enough for taking your time out, Dan. I think a lot of people will take a lot from this, and it'll be a nice eye opener for them to see, your background in the sport, because they see you on the TV, and unfortunately today's day and age, not a lot of people do their homework and have a look at the history. I'm like yourself. I'm an MMA geek, whereas I need to know everything. I want to delve into backgrounds, and if I see something that interests me, I like to get the history on it. But hopefully this lockdown won't last too long. Myself and Jack will try and get up and have a session with you guys, and it'd be great for you to pop down and drop in for a session or two with us as well.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely do that. I'll look forward to getting tied up and choked out by a bantamweight. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Before we wrap up, do you want to tell people where they can find you on social media?
It's all pretty straightforward. I'm Dan Hardy MMA on everything: Instagram, Twitter. Full Reptile as well is pretty much everything we've got going on. We've got the YouTube channel and the shop as well. So we've got lots of things going on. But if you find me at Dan Hardy MMA, everything kind of links through from that.
Brilliant. All right, stay safe, Dan, and I shall see you soon, my friend.
Will do, mate. Great catching up.